Hello again, everybody. Red of Half Century Collecting Sports Cards. Another edition of my favorite 400 cards. We're going to show 5 more today. But before we do that, I just want to give congrats to the 2 new Hall of Famers. Just announced tonight, Dave Parker and Dick Allen from the Veterans Classic Era Committee. We'll talk a little bit more at the end of this. Probably not a whole lot, but just a little bit about these two. But before we do that, we're going to get into more cards in my favorite 400 series. This is a red Shandies from the 1954 Wilson Franks cards. These were cards that were distributed in the Midwest only by a Chicago-based company. 1 card to a hot dog pack, and they got put right in the middle with the hot dogs. So most of these cards ended up with hot dog juice stains, a lot of wrinkles. This card, I don't know, I smelled it. It doesn't really smell like any kind of hot dog to me. I can't find any actual stains on it, front or back. But it does have some creasing. But nonetheless, I think a really cool card. These cards, they kind of patterned after the 54 Topps. That same colorful background, similar writing to the top, and instead of the team logo, they get the Wilson Franks logo, which is pretty cool. The backs of these cards, not as colorful as the 54 Topps, but gives a lot of cool info. You know, they got a nice little stats section, little story section, bio. And you can see on the back of this Shandies card, this was the peak of his career. So that is career high right there for batting average, 342, home runs, 15, RBIs, 79. He also had the most runs scored ever in his career, that 53 season. Had over 900 OPS. The only time he did that, he was 4th in MVP voting. This 54 season also was a really good year for him. He was a Cardinal from 45 to 56, and then he was traded to the New York Giants, just spent a year there. And after that, went to the Milwaukee Braves in 57, where he got to play in the World Series, both 57 and 58. Bobby Thompson was on the trade going the other direction. And at the end of his career, ended up back with St. Louis. Managed in close to 10, it must have been over 10 years, because he won over 1,000 career games. And he did get to manage a World Series championship team in 67. And a team that lost to the Tigers in the World Series in 68. He is in the Hall of Fame as a player, though, where he had over 2,400 career hits, over 400 doubles, 10-time All-Star, 289 average, almost 45 WAR, and a real good defender. So, red Shandies. Next on the list, we've got a T206 card, and this is, at the top there, a Sovereign back. And this is of Fred Merkle. Now, Merkle was known for something he did more as a teenager, but he had a decent 16-year career, mostly with the Giants. But there was a game in late September 1908. So, the 1908 season, this is a 1910 card. So, more, you know, showing the 1909 seasons, just a year after that. But there was a big pennant race, 3 teams. One was the Pittsburgh Pirates. One was the New York Giants, and the other team in the thick of it was the Chicago Cubs. Now, the Cubs and Giants were playing each other just late September day, and happened to be a really good game. The Cubs had only scored 1 run. It was an inside the park homer from their star shortstop, Joe Tinker. The Giants also had just 1 run, and the RBI was by Roger Bresnahan, here shown with the St. Louis Cardinals, but in 08 he was a Giant. So 1-1, bottom of the 9th, 2 outs. Runner on first base for the Giants, and Fred Merkle, who only had 48 at-bats all year as a 19-year-old, was up to bat. And he hits a line drive down the right field line. Base hit, runner from first gets to third, so now we got runners at the corners and 2 outs. And the next batter gets a line drive to center field. You think a base hit, as it lands on a bounce into the center fielder's glove. The runner from third comes across the plate, but the fans started stampeding the field. Merkle is, you know, he's just kind of jogging between first and second, And with all the fans out there, he just turns around and goes back to the dugout. A lot of time goes by, like, I don't know, 10, 20 minutes. And still on the field were the Cubs. And Johnny Evers, the second baseman, somehow ended up with the ball. Now, I should say a ball. This story is told many years later, and it was told differently by different people. But Evers ended up with a ball. Now, apparently, as the ball came in from center field, the first base coach, who was Joe McGinnity for the Giants, came over and somehow ended up with the ball and threw it into the stands, it sounded like. But Frank Chance either got the ball out of the stands or he got a different ball. Somehow he got a ball, and he threw it to Cubs shortstop, still in the field, Tinker, who threw the ball to Evers. So it wasn't Tinker's to Evers a chance, but this one was Chance to Tinker to Evers. And Evers stepped on second base as the umpire is still watching this and calls Fred Merkle out on a force play at second base. So game still tied. Runner didn't count. It's 1-1. The ninth inning's over. We got to go to extra innings. Trouble is, there's all these fans in the field. They can't clear them. It gets dark. Game gets called as a tie. And they play out those other 6 games. And as they play out those other 6 games, the Pirates and Cubs end up tied a half game behind the Giants. So the Pirates and Cubs still had a makeup game to play, so they played it. And the Cubs won. So now the Cubs and Giants are tied. Lo and behold, they actually have a makeup game to play, that tie game, so they play it. And in that game, Jack Pfister is the pitcher for the Cubs, same guy who pitched that 1-1 game. Now, John McGraw for the Giants wants to send out his star pitcher, Christy Mathewson. Mathewson's arm is pretty tired, and he does get in the ball game anyway and pitch some, and unfortunately doesn't quite have it. He gets the loss, and the Cubs, Mordecai Brown, Pfister didn't have it either, only went a third of an inning. Mordecai Brown came in. Mordecai gets the win in relief, with a lot of relief actually, and the Cubs win 4-2. The Giants, unfortunately, don't win the pennant, and the Cubs are in the 1908 World Series. The play becomes known as Merkle's boner because without that play, the Giants would have won. They wouldn't have had to play that last game, and for the rest of his career, he is known as Fred Bonehead Merkle. Plays out the rest of his career, which isn't bad, but still has that nickname. Now, in 1950, at age 61, they had an old-timers game, and Merkle was there for the Giants. Gets announced, comes up to bat, and the fans give him this long standing ovation, realizing, I think, that, you know, this probably wasn't really Merkle, a guy who was 19 years old, living with this, you know, the rest of his life. Wasn't really all his fault either. I mean, something like that probably normally could happen, and they wouldn't even call it. The umps wouldn't necessarily make that call after all that time, but they did. So Merkle ended up kind of as a happy Giant for the rest of his life. All right, we spent a lot of time on those first 2, so let's not spend so much time on these last 3. We got a 1982 Topps Traded here, and I know this doesn't really fit in the vintage mode by definition, if there is a definition of 1980 and older, but I like this card, and it's pretty close. It's still 42 years old, and he's the second best shortstop of all time, at least according to my old, when I did my all-time shortstops. I think that was the first one I did for a position. Number 1 was Hannes Wagner. Number 2 was Cal Ripken Jr. Ripken Jr. ended up with 96 career WAR, over 3,100 hits, over 400 home runs, and he's got the 4th highest defensive WAR. See that card? 4th highest defensive WAR of all time. Here are our top guys. Ozzie Smith is number 1, no surprise. Mark Belanger, number 2. Brooks Robinson, number 3. Cal Ripken, number 4. Joe Tinker comes back here. He's the number 5 all-time defensive war guy. And number 6, Luis Aparicio. And if there's the one thing you notice out of this, look at all these Oreos in here. I mean, those two guys played together several years, Belanger and Brooks Robinson on the left side of the infield. And before Belanger, this number 6 guy, Luis Aparicio, spent a lot of years in Baltimore. His main years were with the White Sox. But probably what Cal Ripken is known more for than his defense is, well, he was also a great athlete and apparently a really good dunker. But even more than that, he was known for passing this guy on the career consecutive games played list, 2130 at the time. Ripken ended up over 2,600. I don't know the number by heart. I know Gehrig's number by heart. I remember that moment, though, when he passed Lou Gehrig at 2131. The game, he did the lap around the whole field, giving high fives to everybody in the first row of the stands. We're thinking, man, that would have been pretty cool to be in the stands that day watching that. But Cal Ripken. All right. I guess I have 2 of that Topps traded card. So next we are going to 1970 in Harmon Killebrew. And how does this card make my list? Well, it mainly makes my list because I got this card a long time ago. About, I think, 1976 or so. So I would have been like 11 years old, 11, 12 years old. And got a magazine. I know I've told this before. They got a magazine called Trader Speaks. And that was before we got Sports Collectors Digest. And it was just this, I don't know if it was really called a magazine or kind of more like a booklet, but it had some ads in there. And there was one guy who sold cards that we bought from all the time, and I do not remember who that was. But in there, they'd sell commons at a price in the 70s. You know, the 70s are only 6, 7 years old at that time. They were, I don't know if they were 5 cents or 10 cents, but then there were stars, and they listed the stars' names, and those guys were 5 times. Those were guys like Veda Pinson and some guys like that. And then there were superstars that gave a list, and those were guys like Rod Carew, Lou Brock, Harmon Killebrew, Frank Robinson, Brooks Robinson. So Killebrew cost 10 times a common. So if it was 5, it was 50 cents, or if it was 10 cents, it was $1. In either regard, it was not that expensive. And I get this card, and I remember it just came back with perfect corners. And so the thing I remember doing is, now you can see there's a little wear on the corners, is I purposely just rubbed those corners because I thought that card looked fake. It just looked too nice, way too nice of corners. And my cards that I played with all the time had really rough corners, way rougher than this. So I just roughed it up a little bit to make it what I thought looked more real. I love this card because, one, I love these 1970 backs. But this back shows the great year Killebrew had there with 49 home runs and 140 RBIs, which is enough for an MVP that season. Now, Killebrew, I think he got underrated because he had not that great of a batting average, but he ended up with a 376 career on-base percentage. So even though his batting average wasn't that high, real high on base, and then all those home runs. In fact, when he retired, he was 5th all-time in home runs. And I'm going to show the list here, showing as many 1970 cards as we can, the same as Killebrew. 4 of the 5 guys in the top 5 at the time had 1970 cards. So Hank Aaron, at the time Killebrew retired, was number 1. Babe Ruth was number 2. Willie Mays was number 3. Frank Robinson, a contemporary of Killebrew, was just ahead of Killebrew, came in at number 4, and then Killebrew at number 5. All right. 5th and last card for the day. It's a 1965 Pete Rose. And that's, for some reason, that's been my favorite Pete Rose card. You know, if he were in the Hall of Fame, what I do with all the guys in the Hall of Fame is pick kind of my representative card, everybody. And this is the one I would pick of Pete. Now, Pete's a guy, he's the career leader all time for games played, plate appearances, at-bats, and hits. His 4,256 career hits that passed this guy. I remember when he passed him, passing Ty Cobb. Now, besides that, you know, his career on base percentage, he's one of the best leadoff hitters of all time, was 375, really good. But as I just said, Killebrews was 376. So tells you how good I think Killebrew was as well. But the other thing with Rose, he ended up with 79.5 career WAR, and he won 3 World Series. That was after first losing the 70 World Series to the Orioles, and then the 72 World Series to the A's. Ends up winning it with the Reds in 75 and 76, and then with the Phillies in 1980. He is one of 4 players, and I wonder if you can think of who they are quick, with over 700 career doubles. So number 1 on that list is Tris Speaker. Number 2 is Pete Rose. Number 3 is the guy we just showed, Ty Cobb. And number 4, Stan Musial. So those are the only guys ever to get over 700 career doubles right there. So the other thing I wanted to show, since we end up with a 65 card, is I want to show it an unopened 1965 pack. Looks like this one graded by GAI. Was the only pack grading company back before PSA did it. These 65 packs, I think, are pretty cool designed. I think I figured out that's a Sonny Siebert that you can see through the back there. Yeah, you can actually see his name, Sonny Siebert on the Indians. So pretty cool cards from 65. So like I said, this is the Pete Rose, if he were in the Hall of Fame, that I would pick. So question, if anybody's still listening, in the comments section, who would you pick, because I'm going to have to do this now, for your representative cards for Dave Parker and Dick Allen, the 2 new guys in the Hall of Fame. I was really disappointed John Donaldson didn't get in, but these are 2 good ones to get in. I did a recent episode of who I would have picked. Dick Allen was my number 3 guy, and I'm real happy he got in. I'm also happy, even though Parker was my number 7 out of 8 guys for the picks, the one thing that's kind of cool is that he got in while he's still alive. So he's going to be able to be there on the induction, which I think is going to be a pretty cool thing. All right, that is it for today. Where do we put Killebrew? So here's our cards from today. Last little look at, here were the cards from last time on my favorite 400 list. We will see you again, hopefully in the next week. Take care, everybody.